My name is Lyle Wildes. I spent 20 years growing up, 20 years messed up, and 20 years locked up, but I never gave up, and that's why I'm speaking up today. I want to speak up about the problems that we're having with recidivism and incarceration and crime. So the first thing I want to say is that I spent 20 years, actually I was sentenced to 264 months in federal prison. I was a philosophy professor before I went to prison. I've been in prison in both state and federal prison. State prison for 3 years, federal prison for 20 years. While I was in federal prison, I realized that many of the people in prison had a lot of things in common with me. So I was born and raised on a farm. I had all the Christian values. And then I went to college. While I was at college, I was working for a refrigeration company, and I was delivering refrigerators to work my way through college. While I was doing that, I was coming around the corner with the truck that I was driving. It was a 72 El Camino, and I was going way too fast, and I hit a bridge going 60 miles an hour, a bridge Bateman, and I just separated that car into two pieces. And the motor came back past me. My head went against the steering wheel. I drove my forefront teeth into the steering wheel. It knocked me out for just a second. And then when I woke up, I broke my teeth off, got out of the car, and I was going to run to the neighbor's house for help. And I ran and I ran and I ran and I couldn't get there. But I remember seeing the house and I remember seeing the car. And pretty soon a farmer came over the hill. And he stopped and I said to him, "So can I ask you 3 questions?" He said, "What's that?" And I said, "Am I hurt? If I am, will you take me to the hospital? And why can't I get to that house?" And he said, "Well, you are hurt and I will take you to the hospital." He said, "The reason you can't get to the house is look down." I looked down and I had been running in a circle. And I could see the house and I could see the car, but I couldn't get my orientation to get to the house. So he drove me to the hospital. When I got to the hospital, I sat down in a wheelchair into a wheelchair, and I thought, man, I'm safe now. And the next thing I heard was the doctor telling my wife of 5 months, "I'm sorry, Mrs. Wildes, but your husband's gone." Now, when you hear something like that, you have a couple of thoughts. Either death is different than I thought, or I have a really poor doctor. And so I decided to challenge the doctor, and I squeezed my wife's hand, and she said, "Doc, he's alive. He just squeezed my hand." And the doctor said, "No, those are just death spasms. He's dead." And then I started to move my legs, and so he finally did another test, and they rushed me to the hospital in Dubuque, Iowa. It's called the Mercy Hospital in Dubuque, Iowa. And they literally saved my life. And when I got out of the hospital, I'd been married for 4 months. When I walked out of that hospital, Phil, I didn't have any compassion for anybody or anything. I just didn't give a hoot about anything. So my wife come to pick me up, and I said to her, "So why did we get married?" And she said, "Well, because we love each other." And I said, I don't love you. I don't like you. I don't want to be married to you. I don't want anything to do with you. So she starts to cry. She calls her mom calls my mom calls me and said, "What's going on with you? You're not the son we raised." And she said, "If you don't shape up, we're going to disown you." And I said, "Then just disown me." And I went to Madison, and I had a vasectomy at the age of 22. So they'd never have any grandkids. And so then I just went on a spree, and I did what I wanted, when I wanted, and as much as I wanted. And I become an underground chemist, and I duplicated Bill Stotter's synthetic cocaine molecule. And so in the process of doing that, I became a drug dealer. I didn't want to use it because I never used drugs and hadn't drank, I hadn't smoked, done anything. So in the drug business, I could really do really good because I didn't have any compassion for anybody. And I was often called blue because when you saw me, I come up out of the blue. I wasn't the biggest guy in the room, but if I got you at a disadvantage, I had you. And so that went on for about 10 years, maybe 15 years. And I got in a relationship with a woman who was also into drugs, but just, she just was the kind of person that lived a high risk life. And so we got into a dispute about how our lives should be run. And if I'm making all the money and we live on a 10-acre field with a 3,300 square foot house with a swimming pool, I get to tell her what to do. And she didn't agree. So she called the cops. And when she called the cops, they arrested me, and I was prosecuted by the state. They didn't know what they had, so they only gave me 4 years. And then when I got out of the state, the feds picked me up and gave me 22 more years. So when I was arrested and I went to the federal system, I don't know exactly why, it was just kind of serendipitous, but a psychologist wanted me to create a class in prison that would repel the negativism of incarceration. And I remember telling him, how silly is that? Why don't you just change the culture of the prison? And he said, Lyle, that's never going to happen. And I said to him, it's going to happen in my lifetime because I'm going to make it happen. And so I did everything I did everything he told me to do in terms of developing a class. So I'm in the federal system where I think there's both the smartest and the dumbest. And so I started to develop this class, and it was called the Positive Attitude Development Class. And I turned it into a 20-week class because we had a little extra time on our hands. And we could, go to class. So I actually stayed at that institution for 9 years. And when you stay in an institution for 9 years, you really get to know the Bureau of Prisons operations. And so the men who took my class took it for 20 weeks. When the class was over, they liked the class so much that they wanted to sign up for it again. And I said, why would you sign up for it again? And they said, we just want to be in a room in prison where you're talking positive at least 1 hour a day, 1 hour a week. And I said, well, you can't sign up for the class again because there's all people already signed up for it. So they said, okay, start another one. So then I had part 2, talk about what we learned in part 1. When that was over with, they wanted me to start part 3. So I went all the way out to part 5. So I had 5 classes talking about positive living and how we could change our lives. So I finally had to collapse the 2 to 5, and I just had a positive attitude development group. And I had a positive attitude development class. And that group is where I learned so much about the incarceration and about the inmates that I was in prison with. And so I actually developed that out for 18 years. And when I got out, the federal court that sentenced me hired me back and gave me a contract to teach the federal inmates coming out of federal prison in the Western District of Wisconsin, and gave me a contract. And the judge says, it's really strange that we paid $500,000 to house you, and now we got to pay $10 grand to contract you. And I said, yeah, that's how it's supposed to work. But anyhow, so what I learned about incarceration and the men in prison is prisons are an antiquated way of dealing with people who attack the power structure. And so when you have a power structure that keeps the resources from certain families and certain individuals, they're willing to risk their life to get food for their family, to get money selling drugs. And out of every inmate in prison, about 85% of them have at least 3 or more of the ACE factors, adverse childhood experiences. What I also found out is that the general public, only 7% of them had 3 or less. And when you have 3 or less, you're less likely to go to prison, because 3 or more means that you have been brutalized as a kid, brutalized as an adult, maybe bullied, whatever it might be. So I just started to see that. And as I was doing it, I said, okay, when you have a child or a young adult who's required to make decisions in which the brain is unable to do, and then you punish him for that, that's a really mixed message. And so I started to research the 9 years that I was in prison. I was in 9 years at another prison, which I'll tell you about later, but the 9 years that I was in this prison, the staff, they did what the system does. If you get a shot, you go to the hole. If you get too unruly, you take Thorazine. They give it to you. I mean, if you get too ruly, they'll shoot you up with it. So pharmaceuticals are used to manage behaviors. So prison and the courts never care about the cause of the crime. They always explain it as you had a different choice. And I do not believe the brain ever makes a bad choice. You may regret it the next day, but brains don't make bad choices. Brains make choices over the past to survive. And if you see a guy look at you a certain way, or if you see another child look at you in a certain way and it's been bullied, that if you kill that other child, that brain did that because it needed to do that. And so as I was talking to the men in class, I said, so how many of you believe that either your parenting style, your peers, your educational system, your religion, the military, or the media influenced your life in some way, in a negative way? And they would all tell me that there was experiences by their parents, by their peers, by gang members, by opposite gang members, that actually damaged their brains. And so when you have a community of institutions that are damaging brains, and then you hold them responsible for their bad behavior, that's messed up. That's just messed up. And so what I learned was that I could never understand exactly why we went to prison. Why did I go to prison? Because manufacturing cocaine, the brain saw it as a way to survive. So I was a philosophy professor during the 20 years that I was in KS. And while I was a philosophy professor, I was teaching the kids philosophy. And they were in the western parts of the United States, and they didn't seem to care. They were all into either farming or mining or whatever it might be. And they didn't really give a hoot about philosophy. So I always felt like I was wasting my time. So one day I walked in, I took a yardstick, a real thick yardstick, and maybe a half-inch stick, and I hit my table and I said, all of you students, get out of my classroom and don't you ever come back, and you're never wasting my time again. So I hit the table, they were screaming, running down the hall. I'm hitting the wall as they're running down the hall, all the way out the door. And they got all the way out the door. I turned around and was walking back to my office, and the other professors were looking out the hallway. And I said, people just don't understand. They just don't understand. And I said, and I'm not going to put up with it. And so that's my brain damaged by a car accident that didn't have any patience, didn't have any compassion, and I could care less what they felt. And so, within an hour, the president of the university was at my door. And she came in and she knocked on the door, and when I opened the door, she said, how did she put it? She said, Mister, don't you ever think you can just do that to our students. You got to go back to your classroom. And I said, when the system changes so that they give a damn, that's when I'll go back. And she said, well, they all paid their money. And I said, they paid their money for what you produce. I don't want to produce what you produce. I don't want to produce people who are greedy. They want more. They have no limits in their life. They have no boundaries. They're just going wild. And I'm just not going to care about them. So I had to go back and I had them write a paper. And some of the papers were really amazing, that students that wrote and really agonized over what I had done and how much they really wanted to learn. And so, you know, that still kind of haunts me in my life, but that's okay. So I would ask the guys in the class, I'd say, so tell me something. What do you value the most in life? And they would say, family, honesty, integrity. I said, hold it. If you valued family and integrity and honesty, you wouldn't be in prison. So what do you value? Now I got, you know, everybody from every kind of gangster there is angry at me because I said they don't value their family. And I said, okay, so let's look at it. If you valued your family, would you be in prison? If my family's hungry, I'm going to steal. I said, yep, I got that. But I said, were you stealing or were you, you know, what were you doing that you got yourself in prison? Okay, so I said, so let's look at it like this. I don't know too much about the brain, but about the second year I was in prison, I set a goal to read 50 pages of every day. And I read strictly about neurology, philosophy, and psychology. And so I knew all about their diagnostic tests, and all of that is subjective. There's no evidence, it's subjective. So I thought, well, why can't we get a method of identifying the brain and seeing what the brain is doing and see if it's related to the actions? And so I started to ask the guys, I said, okay, let's look at it like this. What were you doing when you violated the behavior that would save your family? Oh, that's simple. I was out messing around. I was out dealing drugs. I was out having fun. I was independent, you know? And I said, oh, so you're telling me that your brain has two sets of behaviors. It's got a relationship building behavior and it's got a relationship sabotaging behavior. And that is why you're in prison, because you have two strong behaviors. So I just kept following it, and I wrote about it. I finally created a method for doing that. When I got out of prison, I went to the University of Wisconsin and I asked the leadership classes if they'd let me do their core values. And so they did. And they had the same core values and the same violators: greed, power, control, independence. You know, if you have independence and you're in a relationship and your risk level is real high, you've got to have a lot of excitement for risk. You don't really care about holding a baby. You care about going 150 miles an hour with your motorcycle, passing cars in the middle lane. You know, that's where it's at. And your wife doesn't want you doing that because she wants the dad around to raise a child. There's a problem. So when I realized that, I started to ask the guys, you know, and started to ask the students, same core values, same violators. Then the Chamber of Commerce had 300 people in leadership styles. I asked them, same core values, same violators. Then I asked the domestic abuse people, 200 of them, how many that was, same core values, same violators. Then I asked the 13 to 18-year-olds in treatment, same core values and same violators. Now, how can you have the same core values and same violators and have different outcomes? Some are in prison, some are in chaos, and some are happy. How could that be? Well, that told me that the neurologists can't find values in the brain. Neurologists can't find the sense of self in the brain. And so what they do find in the brain is neurological networks. There it is. It has to be the neurological networks that are in conflict with each other because of some trauma. The people who have these same core values and violators, and they're not traumatized, they can spike and come back down and cool off. But those who can't, they're up here like this, just ratcheting, waiting for the next moment. And so in research, I found out that prison guards are really high on fight and flight, and prisoners are really high on stuffing their feelings because they don't have any power. When you have fight and flight, hey, what are you doing? What are you up to? And they go, none of your business, shut up. And the cop keeps pushing them. That's when cops get killed, because they stuff until they're done and then they hit like a bomb. So prisons are built to explode. As long as you have hierarchical environments. So my only conclusion was that we have to identify the neurological landscape of people in prison. So I've been working to get neurology in the courtrooms, and they just won't let it in. And they won't let it in, and I understand why they won't, because neurology does not just, you can't trust a neurological landscape to produce a certain behavior. But a certain behavior, psychopathy has the same landscape every time. But you can have a psychopathic landscape and not kill anybody. But if I was going to get married, and I have made a promise of this, that before I die, I want every husband and wife to want their husband's landscape or their wife's landscape known before they get married. I want to know how safe I am. And I also want to know, I want the child to be, his brain to be scanned before he goes to prison and scanned when he gets out, so we can show the damage that that prison experience causes. Now, you know, we talk about evidence-based programs. Incarceration has failed for 500 years or more. It's failed. It's not evidence-based. It's enculturated. It's ingrained in our community. And so when you think of punishing someone for a crime or holding someone accountable, that really is an interesting question. And I know it has to be debated for, you know, really seriously. But when I went to prison, had I not had an automobile accident, I would have never been in prison. There's no doubt in my mind about it. When I got busted and everybody knew what I was doing, it was just unbelievable. And so, and I'll tell you, I was one of those people who had a really good life, and it changed like that. And then I went to prison, and I spent 20 years under a structured environment that I didn't even care about their rules. I lived my life independent of the prison rules. I read 50 pages every day. I was a vegetarian. I got my fruits and vegetables. I went for walks. I ran every 3 days. And I taught a class, so my brain was structured. It was always repeating the same things. I literally drove my brain to be a compassionate brain. I know it works. You can drive a brain to have compassion. You can also drive a brain to kill. We do it every day in the military. So when we talk about brain plasticity, and I'm telling you, brain plasticity is the most revolutionizing concept this country will ever experience. And Michael Merzenich is the one who really introduced brain plasticity to the neurological world. So picture this. The baby is in, the embryo is inside of the womb, and the heart, they call it the heart rate. It's not a heartbeat. There's no heartbeat in that baby. There's a tweaking of some cells. It's smaller than your little fingernail that tweaks. You know, there's no heart, there's no blood, there's nothing. Where does that tweak come from? Who knows? But every organism has the same tweak. It just tweaks. And after a while, it finally tweaks all the heart cells, and the heart starts to pump, but it never pumps blood until it's out of the mother. And so if it doesn't develop right, they call it heart disease, and then they have to operate on little babies. But there's really a big change that takes place at birth. Okay, so when you think of the mysterious tweaking of some flesh, none of the other flesh tweaks, none of it. Just that piece. And we can't even create that without sperm and eggs. We can't even create a piece of meat that will tweak like that. So then you got a brain developing inside of the organism, and the low frequencies in the brain start to develop first, because those are the survival skills. So if something happens to the little organism in the womb, it will respond because of the information coming in through the low frequencies. And when it comes out of the womb, however it comes out, either by birth or by C-section, when it comes out, they all have the same generic neurological landscape, unless they've been damaged in the womb. So if you have the same kind of neurological landscape and you have brain plasticity, you could train that baby to be anything, a killer, an apathetic person, a genius. And so I know that when babies are born today, they are programmed to go to prison. Their little brains are being developed so that they will violate our social contracts. And I know that I don't want that little brain held responsible for that when everything in our community is promoting the kind of things that traumatizes babies and children. I have sat on young men's bunks and I have heard horrific stories. Young boy tells me that he had to give his uncle a blowjob, and when he was done, he got beat because he did it wrong. What do you teach a kid like that? Or the father rapes his daughter. You know, I mean, parenting is not something that we should take lightly. And prisons is not the answer to that kind of damage. So my goal is to have all prisons turned into brain care centers, because brains are what's causing crimes. Why wouldn't we want to look at brains? Presently, I'm working with neurological landscapes here in Minnesota. But I knew that if I identified the hot spots and cold spots in the brain, there's no way to address them because we're not researching brain plasticity and how we could actually reverse the damage that some other brain that was damaged this brain, and that brain is going to damage another one. And there's big bucks in trying to solve that problem inappropriately. It's just been unionized, scrutinized, accepted. Throw your hands up, what else works? Let's just lock them up. And when someone kills your sister, you are really angry at that person. And it's just, why would they do that? Well, when you look at the brain and you look at their past, you would shed tears for him or her, as well as the victim of death. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to figure out how we can get prisons to understand the damage they're doing. When I left prison, I really had to focus on how I was going to live as a citizen in the community. So when I got out of prison, another serendipity thing happened, but a guy named Brooks Anderson here in Duluth got put in prison for protesting the schools of America that trained assassins. And so he stepped on their property, they arrested him, put him in jail for 90 days. And he met me and said, why don't you come to Duluth, Minnesota? We need you in Duluth. And so I came to Duluth, but I didn't have any place to live. My mother died, my dad died, my brother died. I didn't have anybody. I didn't have any kids because I had a vasectomy. And I didn't have a wife. You know, that's just the way it is. And so I came to Duluth, and John and Lynn Pegg let me live with them. And when I was living with them, I went into the bedroom the first night and turned the light off. And it's the first time in my life that my brain experienced darkness. And I got sick as could be, because I always had lights, you know, shining in my face in prison. They always want to see skin. And so now I can't sleep because I'm in total darkness. There's nobody around, nobody yelling, nothing. The silence and the darkness drove me almost out of the room. Now, how about that? That's just one of the experiences in prison. Then I meet they want to introduce me to some women just because I was at political parties. And I didn't know how long to stick my arm out, how far to stick it out, how close to pull her in, how tight to hold her hand. Do I look into her eyes and how long? Or does she start to think I'm like stalking her? And if I look away, am I just really slick and smooth? Or what am I trying to do? I had no idea. And then I go to Target, and Target has got so many bright colors that I got there. I had to kneel down on my knees and close my eyes. I was regurgitating because of the stimulation of the stuff. Now, that's just the physical environment of prisons. That's nothing about the cultural environment. And when people come out of prisons, sagging started, they say, in San Quentin, which was a fact that you sagged your pants because you're homosexual and you're looking for a partner. And so sagging started in prison, bumping your fist started in prison, all of the stuff. There's so many habits that we have now in our community that came out of prison. And I just want you to think about this. 700,000 people are released from prison. 25% of the population is released, not 27, not 36, 25 every year. And every year, that same number is rearrested. 700,000, and there's like 700,000, 700,003, 700,024. Every year it goes up just a little bit, so you got to build another prison. But why does the same number come back to prison that left? Why exactly the same number? I think it's inside trading myself. But anyhow, when you've got 700,000 people coming out of prison, 700,000 going into prison, you have 1.4 million cycling through our communities. There's only so many women that'll date a felon. So that means that the men coming out are dating the woman that just lost her husband or her boyfriend. And that man is coming into that house with kids with prison habits, and those children are learning the prison culture. And we got that stirring in our community, and you can see it on the streets every day. You don't disrespect me for that. You can't disrespect me. We got more prison talk on the street than there is in prison. And that's because of prisons. And if you aren't that kind of a person in prison, it's pretty tough to make it. And so when you get out, it's pretty tough to make it. Now, another thing I learned too, and that is that if you give a guy, or I would say a guy, I don't know much about the women in this particular situation, but if you give a guy an apartment, give him a furniture, and give him a job, he will not be in that apartment for long. He'll be living with somebody else, and he'll be out of the job as soon as he's off of probation, because the only reason he's got a job is because of probation. Why? Because in prison, you live with someone 24/7. You're in a room with another person. You do not live in an apartment alone. That will drive you nuts. Okay? And when you're living with another person in prison, you're in total chaos 24/7. And when you get out, you're addicted to it. And if you don't have chaos, you'll create it. And we want them not to recidivate. Come on, folks. Prison is the manufacturing cycle for recidivism. So it's just, I lay on my bed at night before I go to sleep, and I just think about the kid that's going to commit suicide because we don't give a damn about him, and he knows it. And he has no place else. So when I was in Waupun, Wisconsin, which has 5 tiers high, I think it is, and 26 tiers long, and it's maximum security. So there's a building, a hollow building around an island of cells. one night I decided that I was just going to be really quiet and listen to the evening noise of 5 tiers of 52 in each tier, what the noise would be at night. And so I start to listen about 4 o'clock, after everybody's eaten and they've come in from, whatever they were doing. They were locked down 24/7. And so I started to hear this. I started to hear envelopes opening and rereading letters. And then you would hear them blow their noses. And you knew they were crying. And you knew they were just so scared. They were just frightened. And that kind of constant fear is tough on the brain. And then you'll hear somebody go, hey, 10-speed. And that's the guy who stole 10-speed bikes, and they'll say, hey, let's play chess. Okay. And they get their chessboards out. So they each have a chessboard in their cells on opposite ends of the cell block. They put up both sides and they say, okay, you move first. And he'll say 11 to 14. And they'll move that move, so they're playing. And everybody's going, hey, you guys, shut the fuck up, I want to go to sleep. And then we got an argument in the middle of the night, whether they can play chess or whether they can. And then pretty soon you hear another guy opening up a really slick paper, and it's a holy book. And he starts reading. And he reads and he reads these, I call them just lies, they're just lies. And then pretty soon you'll hear them get down on their knees because our bed's folded down off of the wall. So you'd fold the bed up and then you fold the bed down. And you'd hear them fold their beds down, and then you'd hear them pray. And they would pray for the most, if you hear a 5-tier, 52 in each tier, people praying, they're all praying for something that the gods would have to conflict with if they did either one of them. So they're all conflictual prayers. And I go, man, am I glad I'm not God. I just have to tell these people, hey, just stuff it. I'm done with you. But they do it day after day after day, and no results. They'll pray that the judge will have kindness on them. They'll pray that they'll understand why they did the crime. They'll pray that I was hungry. I didn't have anything to eat. They'll pray that my mom and dad were gone and I didn't have any place to stay, so I slept in this building. They got all these kinds of stories. And then about 9:30, this older gentleman would start to play the harmonica, and he would just play the saddest song. And it would just be like, just beautiful. I wish I could have made a movie of it, just hear all of the noises, people peeing in their toilets, people arguing with someone on the next side. Hey, you got a cigarette? Pass it down here. You didn't pay me for the last one. I'll pay you. I need a cigarette. I mean, it is just like crickets in the middle of a big forest, just all going on. And it has a structure to it. It's just incredible. So this is what I would like to see the world turn its attention to. And that is, if the neurological landscape that a human being has in their head, if you could picture that as the network where our sense of self is suspended. You're talking to yourself about what I'm talking to you about, okay? And as you're talking to yourself, we know now that about 65% of the time you talk to yourself, and some 35 or 40% of the time you talk to another brain. And so you're sitting there ratcheting this over and over and over and over. And neurologists know that we have 60,000 thoughts a day, and 85% or 95% of them are the same every day. And 80% of them are negative. Now, let me give you an example. I said, Phil, you, my friend John, he came over last night. You won't believe what he tried to do to me. And I tell you, and you say something like this, you think that's bad? Let me tell you what he tried to do to me. And you up me one on how bad it is. But if I said, hey, Phil, Bob came over last night and you won't believe how good he was to me. He just helped me in so many ways. Oh, you think that? They wouldn't say, oh, you think that's good. Let me tell you what he did for me. Instead, they would say this. Look out, he's up for something. He's trying to con you. Okay. And so all of our thoughts are based around suspicion. And we're not teaching people to be kind. We're not teaching people to trust, because we can't trust people because we're training them to not be trusted. The sense of self that you're talking to right now, if you were really sick, that sense of self might fade a little bit. You'd just say, I'm sleeping, I'm sleeping. So my experience in life has been, I had my nose replaced. I had my jaws rebuilt. I've been under anesthesia a lot. And I always, every time I'd go under, I'd always say, I'm talking to you while you do this time. You're not going to put my sense of self out of this. And, 2 seconds in and I'm gone. And the doc will say to me, open your mouth. And I will open my mouth, but I don't know that I'm opening my mouth. And so under anesthesia, which is the moment between life and death, they got you right there. They can hold you right there. What if you're born with that little chemical, just a little bit of that chemical in your brain that keeps you kind of under anesthesia? We might call it, like cognitive disabilities or something like that. Well, what if we have a chemical in our brain that weakens our sense of self, that does not have the power to override the neurological landscape of the brain as it was raised and experienced? Why aren't we studying how to make the sense of self stronger neurologically? Talk to the brain all you want and nothing changes. You do something with the brain and it changes, and then the situation changes. It's just, I don't know if you have to put implants in, and I know that would scare everybody, but I'm just telling you that we've got a problem that is not going to go away by using incarceration. And when I went to federal prison, there were 35,000 people in federal prison. When I got out, there were 225,000 in federal prison. There was a conveyor belt bringing them in. Where is that manufacturing company at? That's what I want to talk about. It's not born with flaws. It's damaged brains, damaging other people, things, and animals. And we got to take some responsibility as a community for that damage. I was one of the guys that was involved in a program here in Duluth. It's called sentencing circles. Some people might call them healing circles, but we call them sentencing circles. So what we do is people who don't succeed in domestic abuse classes, they go to this circle. And so I was one of the first persons to facilitate some of those circles. And one of the most interesting things that came out of those circles is that the community, be 5 people in the community, 2 people that are facilitating, and 1 offender. And I don't like the word offender either, but so the community is so concerned about whether they will take accountability for their behavior. And if they are accountable, then what do? If they say, I did do this, what's the next thing? They punish them. They revoke their probation, they put them in prison, they put them in jail for 6 months, they do whatever. Whenever you use the word accountability, I believe that it's looking for punishment. How can you have consequences for a behavior that was neurologically driven and not be punishment? So do you have a question?
I feel like there's another bit there. You talked about sentencing circles, and in the sentencing circles, you discovered that people take accountability, and then you posed the question to me about Like,
So,
what are the answers you've discovered?
so
And thank you for what you've been sharing, because it's brilliant, and I've really got a really clear picture, I believe, of the time, the trajectory, the real color of what it means to be in these environments, and the consistent process that is essentially just turning, just moving slavery into the prison system over the last several decades.
Yep. Well, the 13th Amendment, Phil, makes slavery legal in the United States. So they thought it freed the slaves. And if you read the 13th Amendment, it says there shall never be slavery or involuntary servitude in the United States, except
punishment for a crime.
As punishment for duly convicted crimes.
Yeah.
And so it's that 1776, right? Or something like that.
I've got it in front of me. I never knew that. I never knew that line was in there. I always just thought I was clever because I figured it out.
Okay, so just watch this now. Watch what happens. So you have slavery, and the general public doesn't want slavery anymore. So they pass the 13th Amendment. So they thought they freed all the slaves. But what happened was, when the slaves were all freed, you didn't have anybody working. The corporations were broke. So what did they do? They made the legal vehicle for slavery, and that was prisons. So when you convict somebody of a crime, and they were called black codes, I think Angela Davis wrote it in her book, Prisons Antiquated. So you have these codes that if you don't have a job, if you don't have so much money, your vagrancy, and they got from 7 to 11 years in prison. And while they're in prison, the prison couldn't afford to feed them, so they farmed them back out, which was legal to do. They worked for the same people they worked for before they were freed. And we've got this mechanism of slavery going out through the prison systems, and the people are all working just like before. And then the general public says, hey, there's something wrong with this, And so they say, okay, if we can't farm them out anymore, we'll bring them all back into the prisons. So they bring them back into the prisons, and nobody asked this question: should America have houses of slaves? Nobody was allowed to ask that question. And America should not have houses of slaves. They should have brain care centers. The whole process, there's about 50 billion, I think, I don't know, maybe it's 400 billion that's being spent for investigating, arresting, trying, prosecuting, housing, and reentry. There's billions of money being there. Those people are all working as citizens for the betterment of our community, but they have all unionized. So many of them are unions that we cannot stop. The prison system was unionized. As a matter of fact, the guy that started the 3 strikes are out, it was the guy in California, Wilson, signed the agreement. He said the reason he wanted 3 strikes is out so that he would always have a job. Because if people were in for life, they'd always have a job. So we're using people for employment. Prisons were built in downtown Waupun, downtown every place when in the 1800s, downtown, because they were proud of them. Now we build them out in the boondocks, so nobody knows what's going on. Wonder why that is. They take a little community. They took Elkton, Ohio. I was in the Elkton prison. They took Elkton, Ohio, and turned it into a prison, and a lot of people moved to Elkton, Ohio. Cops were guards and staff and all that. Then you also have the wives of the men moving to Elkton. And then you have all these people going to school together, and they can't even play football because it's the cons against the non-cons, and they don't want to play together because they're bad people. They're not bad people. They're damaged people. And they're damaged severely. And the wives are raising children in the best way they can, trying to keep them connected to their dads. Some of the dads don't care, but of the dads that do, it's a tough one. So
Right.
when
I just heard there that I was following along that it just occurred to me, it's the wives of the prisoners who are moving to follow the prison. And then you have the kids, and you have the kids of the guards, and that's the tension.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so it's a real economic boom, but it's chaos. And who wins? The cops.
Yeah.
They arrest the kids of the offenders because the kids of the offenders get in conflict with the kids of the neighborhood.
And then there's a very local prison for them. Yeah, I mean, I've watched a lot of, California fireworkers, inmates being used for wildfire control and working at 7 cents an hour for manufacturing to most of the large American corporations and things. I've been fascinated, it's the wrong word, but on a systemic level, as an observer, it's a hell of a thing.
Yep. So when I was in prison and people were being released, there was a pattern for many of the men. Their parents would come and visit them, their wife would come and visit them, or their boyfriend would, or their friends would come and visit them. When they would come, they would talk about when they're going to get out, and when they get out, what they're going to do. And so the buddy of the guy in prison, he would ask his buddy to note all the restaurants on the way to the prison and on the way home, and find the nicest ones, like 3 or 4 of the nicest restaurants, and then stop and get a menu and send it to me. And I'm going to see what meal I'm going to have when I get out. And so they would spend hours talking to other inmates, and this is a big deal. It's a ceremony, you're going to get out and go to get something to eat. But there's one other thing that they wanted also. They wanted to get laid. And so they would identify 3 women in the community, and they would structure them in a way that they would promise that they would meet with them and have fun when they get out. And I'd say, so why do you line up 3? Well, one might be involved with another guy by the time I get out. One might just be angry at me. And the chances are the 3rd one will be there. She'll be lonely. So I said, okay. So I would watch him get out, and then some of them would write back to me. I wrote to 450 men when they got out, and I just had a really good symphony coming in of information. So this is what I concluded, and this is just a little bit of, this is what I concluded. When a man gets out of prison, no one's there to welcome him to the community. Maybe his parents pick him up, but they don't even like him. And so when he gets out, he has to find a girlfriend, and he has to get laid. And I always thought it was because he wanted to get laid, but it wasn't that. He wanted to find a woman that would allow him to penetrate her and leave his body fluids inside of her and then pull out. And that meant he was totally accepted. The only problem is that acceptance was short-lived, and he had to find another woman to feel accepted. And he will go from woman to woman trying to feel accepted, because no way can he ever feel accepted by the community. When we're talking about re-entry, we better start talking about the damage that they're coming out with, not the job they need to get. If I had my way about it, we would have apartments where people would go in and learn how to live a normal life, a life that isn't full of chaos. That's when I got out after 22 years, I went to my doctor. I went to a doctor and I said to him, so I lived for 1.5 years in somebody else's house because I wouldn't want to live alone. It was just too quiet. So I went to a doc and I said to him, so I have this dog tag. I borrowed a guy's dog tag. And I said, if I need to get a dog in my apartment, I have a tag. So I need you to give me permission to have a tag. And I also need to have permission to buy a plant if I need to, because I suppose I should learn to take care of something, because I just don't give a damn about anything. So, okay, so I get out. I live for a year and a half, and I'm finally getting myself situated around. By the way, I video recorded myself the first 3 months of my release, and I just would say everything that was going through my head, you know. So then when I got out and I moved out of those apartment, out of the piece, I moved in with a lady who was a gay lady, and she had an apartment downstairs. So there was no romance. It was just a place I lived. But I ate in her living room. So she was just another person in my life. Then I moved into this apartment on the 11th floor of the Graceland Hotel here in Duluth. And I walked in, I had my furniture all in there, you know, and I had everything all set up. And then everybody left. And when they left, I sat down on the sofa and I said, okay, this is what it's like to be a normal person. And I sat there for a minute, and all I could hear was the clock ticking. And I looked over at the clock and I said, there goes my life right there, second by second by second. And I said, people pay big bucks for this kind of quietness. And I said, I have it free. All I have to pay is my rent, and nobody can come and visit me. They can't have a key. They can't get to my floor, nothing. So no one has been to my apartment, no one. And so probably 3 years in, the people who gave me a place to live, Brooks and his wife, and a retired doctor that I got to know, I invited him to my apartment, and I said, you can come at 7:30 and you're leaving at 9:30. If you stay longer than that, we won't be friends. And so when we're talking, you know, and we got kind of in a circle, and we had one of these rain sticks, you tip it over. So we're using that as a talking piece, and we were going around, and they were telling me how proud they were of me and what was going down, and how this was all taking place. And one of the guys goes, well, it's 9:30. And I said, you know, this is my place. I say you can stay till 10. And so at 10 o'clock, they left. Nobody else has been to my apartment. I just don't want anybody there. You know, I don't need anybody in my life, you know.
Yeah.
But I know that it took me a process to break away from the chaos and just the interaction with another person. Now I interact with a lot of people, but when I go home, you know, that's my home. Nobody's coming in to interrupt it.
Yeah, I really resonate with the need for nobody and no thing is worth taking away my sense of peace and serenity.
Yep.
And I can't stand ticking clocks. I go into my my parents' old house, and the first thing I do is walk in and I disconnect the clocks because I don't want to hear it. I cannot sit there hearing a tick. It just drives me crazy.
So another thing that really resonated in prison was in my book that I created the class for. I also have a book. It's called Brain Change. It's just under my name. Mm-hmm. I'm the author of it. I wrote a book called Positive Attitude Development Process, and it's where I have an app for people to identify their core values. And it also has an opportunity on my website for people to tell me what they would like the planet's core values to be. So if we could get everybody in Israel and Iraq and everybody to say, what kind of core values would you like to interact with the other human beings? If we just had this culture of core values on the planet, you can believe whatever you want, but you can't misbehave in these core values, you know? And so in my book, I identified this process for identifying core values, and 5 major agencies here in Duluth hired me to find their core values. And the Human Services and Public Health, 160 people were working in this building, and I went in and helped them find their core values. What was interesting about it is here's that, and then I made these little let's see, whoops, they made these little things, and these were their core values that the agency has. And so here's their core values. Mm-hmm. And so I said, if you enforce these core values, but you can only enforce them according to your core values. you can't use violence to enforce peaceful core values, you know? And so the guy said, he said, oh, it's going to be tough. And I said, well, what's going to be the toughest is that you're going to eliminate pecking orders. And when you eliminate pecking orders, there's going to be some resistance. And one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to retire or they're going to destroy your culture. And so one day we were having breakfast, and he said to me, well, the one that's stuck on it the hardest, he said, he just retired. And so if you go down to their company and I walk in and I go, so do you have your little booklet? They have them in their purses or in their pocket. And those are their core values.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm
That's
fascinated
cool.
by the Morningstar Tomato Company in America. They have an idea meritocracy where they have no hierarchy, and basically people can, they write their own position descriptions about what they want to bring to the company, and they're employed based on how they say they're going to operate. And everybody has there's no budgets per se. It's like you and me can go and buy whatever we want, but then we have to front up to everybody and explain what we bought, and everybody can see how much we spent. And it's this idea of, if you really want to see the values of a company, when somebody says, oh, you know, we value our employees and we trust them, say to them, well, how long does it take to requisition a chair? Because that's how you can tell how much a company values its employees. Can they just walk out and buy a chair? How long would it take them to get a new chair? If it's 3 months, you probably don't trust your employees that much. And and it's built in, you know. That's it's fascinating to me. Could you give me a Lyle Wildes as you are today? Like you've got 2 books, you're a brain coach, you're working in, what's that little snapshot?
So if you wanted to know what Lyle Wildes is today, I am just deeply ingrained in helping other people understand what brain damage means to them personally, and that it's not bad brains or good brains or sick brains or healthy brains. It's a damaged brain, and it has plasticity, and it can be healed. And I have a franchise with a company called Cereset. So it's CE for cerebellum, and then it's reset. So it's cereset.com, and they're out of Arizona. And so many of the neurologists live in silos. You know, one neurologist doesn't know what the other one knows. And if they did, they wouldn't be able to get funding for it, you know? And it's just like, oh my goodness sakes, what are we gonna do? So this guy is an engineer, and he was beat up by a group of young teenagers with a ball bat, and his brain was really damaged. And so he went to all the neurologists and all the EMDs and all the psychologists, and nothing worked. And so he decided that if he had problems, it had to be his brain. So he said, I have to understand my brain, and what do I need to do to fix my brain? So I've been looking for this guy for like 20 years, you know? And so what he did is he created a way to scan half of the brain and turn that activity into tones and play it back into the brain. And then do that for 6 or 8 minutes, and then scan the other side, and then turn that into tones and let the brain hear its own activity. And when it does that, it knows when it needs to correct itself. And I have watched people get in the chair and go through 4 days of scanning 2 hours at a time and get up and say, the experience in my head is so much better, I don't even want to open my eyes. Their sense of well-being is just, and so there's 27 of them in the United States right now. There's 8 more just opened up this year, and I'm one of them. And so I'm just trying to figure out how to be the most efficient at it, because it's a rather expensive process. So the rich people get to do it. And I'm just trying to figure out how to help those people. So my goal is to work at it for 1 year and to show that it works. And then I'm going to buy a van, and I'm going to go to all the federal probation officers' offices, and I'm going to scan inmates' brains coming out of prison and giving them a chance to balance their brain so they can make better choices while they're going through the reentry process. And I believe I can do that.
And I got the website up here, and I haven't obviously read through it in this moment, though. So playing sine waves of brain activity back into the head lets the brain self-normalize or self-balance through auditory awareness.
Yep. And so they've done this.
Wow. So it's a recursive learning loop. But
yeah, it is a loop. It is a loop. Yep.
Huh.
Yep. and so then you do it for 4 days, and then you wait 3 weeks, and they come back, and you can just see the changes. One lady, she came and did it, and she got up the next morning, and it was like 2:00 in the afternoon. She texted me, and she said, "I've been trying to quit smoking for I don't know how long, and I forgot to light a cigarette up today." When the brain is balanced, it thinks really clear. When the brain's out of balance, it's on red alert.
So you've painted a wonderful landscape here of challenge. And I'm talking to you because of Stronger Brains. What do Stronger Brains represent to you, and how do you think it can be used?
Okay, so this is kind of an interesting story, another serendipity experience, but all the reading that I did in prison, I read about the University of Wisconsin Neurological Research Center. The guy who runs that's name is Michael Koenig. Michael Koenig was a student of Anthony Damasio, and Anthony Damasio is all the books I read of his when I was in prison. So the feeling of what happened, looking for Spinoza, Descartes' error. Descartes' error is when he separated the mind and body. And so when you separate those two, then you've got two issues. But if they work together, you only have one issue. You have one that work together. So Michael Koenig, I just called and just kept persistently trying to get a hold of him. Pretty soon he answered. And I got to talk to him, so I went to see him. They have scanned 2,500 brains with fMRIs in the state of Wisconsin, and they have a profile of a inmate, different profiles for different things. So when I was doing that, I read this book called Softwired, and it's by Michael Merzenich, who introduced the. So I did everything except hack his email. And I got a hold of him, and he answered me. And so he and I are going to write a book together. And I'm going to describe the scenarios, and he's going to describe the neurological cause. So Michael is involved with Stronger Brains. And so Michael's been involved with Stronger Brains for some time. So Michael was talking to them about me. And so they wanted to get to have me come into their world and share with them what it was like from a person who's been in prison. I mean, I was in prison 9 years in 2 institutions. I know how the prison runs. And I know all the nuances of it, And I've watched wardens come and go.
You said 9 years. So wasn't it not 4 and 22? Or 9
It
in
was
total?
9 and 9 is 18. And then I spent two years at Elkton, Ohio, and then I spent some time at the camp, and then I spent time in Yankton, South Dakota, making it 20 years, 3 months.
Thanks.
And then I had in Waupun, I was in state prison for 18 months.
What do you reckon about the brain training tools? What would your suggestion be for Australia?
The first thing that I would say is that if you want to stay in the same paradigm and you want to punish people, if you're thinking in the same paradigm, but you want to use a new tool, it's just not going to work. So you have to find a way for identifying the younger people whose brains have been damaged, and then invest in those younger kids in ways that allows them to understand what legal lifestyle looks like, what a legal lifestyle feels like, and how it can be rewarding. In prison, I found that there are boundaries in prison And so these are the boundaries you can live by in prison. And many of the men in prison will have to push these boundaries because the limits of prison does not hold the quality of life. And I'm wasting my time. I'm killing my life, you know? So they'll push these boundaries. Well, when I was in prison and I decided what kind of a man I wanted to be, I lived my life more restricted than the prison system would allow me. And so I was never incarcerated because I was living the way I wanted to live. And so when you think about young kids who are living in environments that are going to bring them into the justice system, I think the justice system has to be an agency that first says not why, but how were you damaged? You know, what happened to you? Because there's no excuse. There's no way that you can justify behavior until you bring brains into the equation. Otherwise, you get anger, you get resentment, you just get, it is just so incredible. So Phil, let me just tell you this. Swiss watch, this is the best example I give. Swiss watch had 85% of the watch business in the 70s. Everybody had a Swiss watch. Well, then they wanted to have the research department go in and research the watch for the 21st century. They came back with a watch with a stone in it and a light, and they moved molecules, and it was exactly the right time every time. And the board of directors said, what? Swiss watches have gears and springs, not stones and lights and molecules. Put it on the shelf. So they put it on the shelf. It's on the shelf for like 2 years. They bring it off the shelf. They take it to a watch conference in Texas. Who bought it? Seiko and Texas Instruments. What does the word Seiko means? Exact. And so Seiko bought it, and they revolutionized the watches. So now Swiss had to lay off 75,000 people. They're down to 13% of the watch business, and Seiko is just going like this. And so the interesting thing about it is this, that the Swiss watch person cannot talk to the Seiko person about watches because the paradigms have shifted. And there are no gears and no springs. There are stones and lights and things like that. The paradigm I'm talking about shifting is there's no prison guards, there's no punishment, there's no meanness, there's no hatred, there's patience, compassion, research, and research on where and how are these children's brains being damaged. And we gotta be willing to name it.
Thank you. Yeah, it speaks to me of like the open prisons and things in Denmark where they treat inmates as they just don't take them out of society when they've done a problem. They just put them in this sort of contained environment to go, we're going to work with you and say, okay, this thing has happened. You're still a member of society, so we're going to treat you as such. To me, it seems obvious. If there's one thing you wanted people in the world to know about Michael Merzenich's work, what would you tell them?
Michael Merzenich is the most amazing man I've ever met. I think he has his finger on the pulse of the most nonviolent way to drive the brain to new behavior. And when you're able to drive the brain to new behavior because of brain plasticity, once you get the brain driven to new behavior and that new behavior becomes a habit, you get the benefits of the new behavior, and that's just a perpetual another habit. It just keeps growing, and the quality of life gets better. I think the thing that I just love about Michael is that he said we just have to identify these little kids and find out why they're damaged and who's damaged. I said to him this. I said to him, we should scan the baby's brain a month out of the womb, and then we should scan it every year and to see who the hell's beating this kid up. If that brain's damaged, we got 1 year to look back and find out who did it. And then we're not going to punish that person, but we're going to take that person and show them what's going on with their brains. We got a deep hole to get out of.
That's a tremendously better way of looking at it.
Yeah, when I hear men talking about what their dads did to them, my first response was to hate their dad. But I can't, because that brain did what it thought it needed to do.
Can you talk to me about the domestic abuse intervention project in relation to Australia?
So I'm probably out of camp on this, but I've worked for these people for 10 years. So I'm just going to say this, and that is I got fired as a group facilitator because the domestic abuse program is all about beliefs. If you identify your beliefs and you change your beliefs, your life will change. And I believe that that's true. But I also believe that you can change your beliefs, you can change your behavior. And I use it like this. This is the way you come into domestic abuse. This is the way you leave. Your life has been changed. But because you have not manipulated the neurological network, right back it goes. And so when they complete the course, 85% of them never show up in court again. But it takes some 5 years to complete the course. And while during that 5 years, other women are getting battered. So I wanted to work with them and identify their brains, but of course they don't have enough money to pay me to do what's expensive to do. And so so what I'd like to do is I'd like to tell the world this. There's 30 million felons in the United States. And if every one of those felons stayed out of prison, we would close every prison there is. And I would also like to say that if every felon in the world would want to collaborate with me and my organization, I believe that we could create and hire the right kind of neurologist like Michael Merzenich and his team, and we could revolutionize the results of crime. We could get to the cause of crime. So let me just give you go ahead.
And I mean, the brain is reacting, as far as I'm aware, like the brain is reacting to its need to survive. And a lot of the survival mechanisms are dictated by socioeconomic circumstances. And so if we're not going to change the socioeconomic circumstances, how can we expect that people aren't going to keep stealing to look after their family and things?
So picture this, Phil. A king, so when there were herds of human beings, there probably was a leader that came up out of those herds. I mean, they just had leaders.
Yeah.
And so these leaders might have been really good leaders. You know, they were really good to the kids and they taught the kids things. And I mean, we survived a lot of stuff. So we had some good leaders. But then, you know, after you're a good leader for a while and you start to think about, I'm the leader, I could own all this stuff around me and it would be mine. And then I would pay the people to just help me. And so when the king starts to do that, the king pays what he thinks what they should have. He doesn't understand what they need. And so let's say he pays them $1. And so one of the families is really getting poor. So he goes out in the woods and he sees a deer and he kills the deer and brings it in. One of the king's men sees him and he snitches him out. And so the king says, bring him in front of me. So he brings him in front of me. And he says, so Bob, he said, did you steal a deer from the king's forest? Yes. He said, and sir, he said, I don't want to hear anything about anything more. He said, you stole it. You knew you weren't supposed to steal it. I'm going to punish you. And so bring all the people in front of us. And he brings all the people and he cuts his fingers off. And so all the people go, damn, man, that king is really, he doesn't want us to steal his property, you know? So just get this now. His punishment created fear. So the fear now keeps people from stealing from him, but they still are hungry. So they get it together and they undermine, and they don't steal from his forest, but they steal from his silos. They steal a pail of wheat, you know. Pretty soon the king's men says, you know, we've lost a couple $1 million in just the last 2 years. People are stealing, and I don't know how they are. He said, well, catch one. So they caught one, brought him in front of the king, and the king says, did you steal from me? And the guy said, yes, I did, your honor. And he said, but I want to say one more thing. And the king says, shut up. And if the king would let him speak, the king would be the cause of the crime.
There's that philosophy.
I believe that's absolutely true.
Yeah.
People punish other people to create fear. They do not consider other people's needs, because if they did, they'd have to give up some of the silverware on their table. Well, just think about this. So this is the best example I can come up with. So here's a man in domestic violence. The woman is here and the man is here. He's here because he's stronger than her. And so he says, he tells her what to do and she has to do it. So I said to the group, I said, so let me see if I got this right. There was this guy, his name was Jesus. He said, you know, if the rich are going to feel poor and the powerful are going to feel powerless, why would that be? Why would he say that? How could that be true? So I said, look at it like this. Here's the powerful man. Here's the helpless woman. If he comes down here equal with her, it feels like he's down here. She's now got all the power because he's never dealt with equality. He doesn't know what it feels like. She's got all the fucking power now. She's got all of the power. I don't have anything. I can't say anything. Yeah, because if you said something, it might be wrong. You know, this just doesn't work. And so if you have a lot of money, my friend was working and she was making 80,000. So she got a new job. She's making 180,000. And she didn't like her job. I said, well, go back to your other job. She said, if I did, I'd be broke. She's making 180. She comes back to 80. Now she feels like she's down here. So whenever we give up something to be equal, it always feels like we gave it all up. And we didn't. We just don't know how to talk equality. You can't lie. You can't have them believe what you want because you have power over it. I just crossed the street the other day with a young girl. She's probably like 25, 30 years old. She probably stood about 5'11", really attractive. And I come up, I'm walking across the street and this has got the right of way now. And so I said to her, I don't see a cement truck and I don't see a dump truck. I don't see a semi, I don't see a car. Do you take a chance? I don't think there's an invisible car. Come on, let's cross. She goes, no, I don't take chances. I said, okay. So I step across and I knew if I stepped across and asked her to step across, she probably would. Because if you take a group of sheep and you put a board up and you have the first sheep jump the board, you pull the board out and every other sheep will jump aboard. It's invisible because they saw the first one jump. So she comes with me. We're going across the street and I said, so how does it feel to take a chance? She said, I'm a little uncomfortable. And I said, so I don't know how old you are, but are you in a relationship? She said, yes. And I said, you tell me that you don't take a chance? You don't risk yourself? She said, what do you mean? And I said, well, let's just suppose we put a boxing ring down on the main street here in Duluth, and we pay $50,000 for either you or your boyfriend who could knock the other one out and drag him off of the mat. We will pay the winner 50 grand. Who would get the money? Oh, he would, she said, he would. I said, really? You can't beat him up? She said, no, he's much stronger than I am. And I said, okay, now let me just ask you this question. You say that, do you love this guy? She said, I do. I said, okay, that's pretty good if you love him. I said, but I'll tell you something. Power tends to corrupt, and absolute power will corrupt eventually. So the question is, if this man can beat you up and make you do what he wants you to do, and you're going to have his kids, and he tells you how you're going to raise them, you cannot refuse. So I said, I want you to answer this question. You tell me you love him, but I want to know if you trust him not to abuse his power. She just stood and looked at me, and she said to me, I don't know who you are, but I'm not moving in with him this week. And so when you think about, if you just think about the tribes when we were in herds, so men had sex with lots of different women, and they were having babies, and they didn't always know whose baby it was, except by looks, maybe, right? So women started to watch how men treated babies. And so if they were going to have a relationship with a man, they wanted, even if it wasn't his baby, she wanted him to help her because she's handicapped during pregnancy. She's lonely at night. She needs help. She needs somebody that would help her. Other guys are off fucking somebody else and they don't give a hoot about her, right? And so she's watching them. And women learn how to determine a man's ability to be with you. And so what happened is that they never used the word love. They would talk to each other. Do you trust him? Do you trust him? Do you trust him? I don't know where we come up with the word love. Do you love him? And so if you just have another minute, okay. So there's
That's the
Eric
invention
Fromm
of romanticism. Is the answer,
so,
but please, yeah.
So Eric Fromm wrote about this. He said, you know, love is an interesting thing. He said, there's things called arranged marriages. And that is, you don't love her, you don't even know her. And they put you together and you get married. And the reason they do that is because you have the same social status, the same kind of housing, you have a lot of the same beliefs and the same values, all of that. And when you put together like this, you will make love. You will create love between the two of you. We expect you to do that because you're both in the same kind of a situation, and you'll just create love. Then Eric Fromm says, but then along comes the troubadours and Romeo and Juliet, and they fall in love. They got married before they were in love. The troubadours won't get married until they fall in love. Now, when you fall in love, there's nothing more to do because you're in love. You don't have to make love. You don't have to nurture it. You're in love. But the problem is that the reason you fell in love with her is because she's got a nice body. She'd probably be a good lover. She'd probably be a good mother. She'd probably be good for the neighbors in the neighborhood. So she's like real estate. You could develop her out. She could be developed. And so when that starts to happen and she doesn't like the real estate you want her to be, then she starts to resist, and then you fall out of love and you walk off. And I said, you know, in domestic abuse class, the most interesting thing I've ever heard is a guy will come into class on 1 week. He's in love with this girl. He'll be with her for 2 weeks, and then he'll be having sex with another woman. And then he'll come back and be with the original girl, having sex with her. And I said, so let me see, did you love her? He said, oh yeah, I love her. I still do love her. And I said, okay, so let me see if I got this right now. You were in love with her, and then you had sex with another woman, and then you went back to have sex with her, and you loved her, and that's okay? He said, absolutely. He said, we were out of love. We fell out of love for a little while, and then we fell back in love. He said, and when you're out of love, you can do whatever you want. It's not a violation of the relationship. That is what blew my mind. So I can step in and step out. Step in and step out. Women do not do that. They step in and they expect you to stay there with them.
I'm fascinated by the idea of the confusion of the word limerence. So that people aren't actually falling in love; they're falling into limerence, which is like up to about 3 years it'll go for. And it's the biological. Yeah, where is it?
It's infatuation, what I'd call it.
Yeah, totally. And then the chemical responders, and everybody's going, "Oh, I'm in love." It's like, wow, you just like the smell, and that's happening, and the brain chemistry is going to settle down after you've got enough time to impregnate them and then gestate and leave. It's limerence, whereas love is, arranged marriages, I think. Yeah, what are the aspects and the principles and the pillars upon which a relationship is defined? And where you talked about, equality means not being able to lie and being accountable. If people have lived in a hierarchical power dynamic and never been accountable for themselves, to lose that ability to say whatever the hell they want and to essentially be a bit of an idiot must feel really disempowering.
It is. It's got to be.
Yeah.
I mean, I would have them role play. So, okay, so I'm your wife, and come on, sit down here in front of me, and I want you to ask me, I want you to talk to me about the dishes in the sink. And he'd sit down, but you can't tell her what to do. You can't be mean to her, and you can't like give me a dirty look, but you want me to do the dishes. So talk to me really kind about that. And he sat in the chair and he looks at me and he just said, I have no idea what to say. Just do the fucking dishes. Just do the dishes. And I said, you don't even know. You just really don't. He said, I have no idea how to be equal to someone.
Totally. Because you got a request from a peer rather than command a subordinate.
You gotta have an argument. You gotta have a reason, People will say the house is a mess. And I said, the one thing I want you to think about is that if I came to your house, I'd think you lived in a museum. If you came to my house, you'd think you lived in a zoo, but museum and clean is subjective. What did your house look like with your mom? Oh, she left dishes in the sink. And I said, I'm never going to have dishes in the sink. Well, then why don't you wash them? No, I'm not washing dishes. That's not my job. I make the money. Yeah, okay. So there is just
a long way to go culturally.
Yeah. So if you can see this, right? Yep. So if you just look at this as being an action, then we'll leave this open. Oh, this is not an action. This is a situation right here. Then we'll leave this open, and then this is a okay. So let me just think. So this is the action. I believe this is the feeling, and then this is the action. And so when you look at it, you can't see it.
There we go. Got it. Yep.
Okay, so it's actions, blank, feelings, and action.
Yep.
So when you think about that, so give me a situation. I'd say to the guy, give me a situation that made you mad. And he would say something like, whatever. She'd say, the house is never clean, And I'd say, okay. And when the house isn't clean, how do you feel? I am really upset. I'm really aggravated. And when you're really aggravated, what do you do? What actions do you take? I yell, I throw things, I do that. So you could go through these situations, and then your feelings. And I said, and the probation officer might say something to you like this. When you have this situation, you had different choices than the ones you made.
Yeah. I
do not believe that. When you see a situation and you feel this way, you're going to act that way every time. So I said, so let me give you a situation. When I was in prison, my mom died. And so the situation was my mom died. My feelings were, I wanted to go to her funeral. And when I wanted to go to her funeral, the 27-year-old punk just got out of college, said to me, the Bureau of Prisons rules are that you have to go handcuffed, shackled, and black boxed, which is my arms are back down. And I said to him, I'm going to Lime Ridge, Wisconsin there's going to be 40 people that I'm going to come in with chains and handcuffs and black boxes and a cop walking beside of me. It's going to look like I'm Jesse James, and mom would never want me to be like that. He said, if you want to go, that's the way you're going. Case closed. I said, okay, fine. I leave. I am really upset. So I make an agreement with one of the lifers to have a little accident with this case manager. So I'm going to have his legs broke. And so one of the guys on the compound says to me, you know, Lyle, if you break his legs, they're going to know you did it and you'll never get out of prison. And I said, well, you know, I want to just go to my mom's funeral. I want to show her some respect. I just want to do that. And he said, I don't know where you learned that you need to go to a church with a dead body in it, in a wooden box or whatever kind of box. And then you think that's respecting your mom. And then you're going to break his legs? Come on, Lyle. What? He said, my mom just died 9 months ago and I never even asked to go to her funeral. And I think I respected her. I said, really? He said, yeah. He said, what I did was I went to my cell and I laid down and I cried and I kicked and I screamed in my pillow because I liked my mom and she died. He said, and then when I got up, I came out and I told everybody on the compound what a great mom I had. He said, so let me tell you something, Lyle. The belief that you have, and where the line is, the blank line, the belief you have causes you to be that angry, because that belief says, if you don't go to your mom's funeral, people will think you don't respect your mom. If you change that belief, he said, like what? And he said, so how old was your mom when she died? I said, 84. He said, did she ever send you money? I said, she did. She sent me $1 for every year old I was. And at the end of her life, she was telling me I was getting to be quite an expense. And I said, she would always tell me a joke at the end of the conversation. And she was always a really good mom. And he goes, well, Lyle, he said, what happens if you would just say, I know that my mother doesn't want me to break his legs and spend the rest of my life in prison. And so mom would want me to cry, even just go out on the park bench and just cry. And then go to your room and cry and kick and scream and yell. And then come on out here and tell us what a great mom you had. That's what your mom would really like to know that you're doing. And I said, really? He said, yeah. So when I changed my belief about how I had to show respect to my mom, it changed my behavior. And when it changed my behavior, you know, it was over. And I was neurologically in a place where I could do that, you know. But I need to tell you this as well. That young man went running every other day. And about 2 weeks after I gave up breaking his legs, he went running and had a heart attack and died. I would have broke his legs, had his legs broken, spent the rest of my life in prison, and he would have never agonized 1 minute.
I was worried. I thought you were going to say he would have never died. Sorry.
Oh, no. But, you know, just to give you a texture for prison.
Yeah.
Like my mom, when she was going to die, I called her on Saturdays, every Saturday. And on Friday night, I called her and she said, oh, Lyle, I'm ever glad you called. And I said, really? I said, why? She said, the doc said I'm going to be dead on Monday. And I said, what do you mean dead on Monday? She said, yeah. She said, I got cancer all through my body. And I said, why didn't you tell me that? She said, I didn't want you to worry. And I said, Mom, you know, I only have 15 minutes that I can talk to you. I have 14 minutes left. What are we going to talk about before you die? She said, well, what do you need to talk to me about? And I said, well, I just need to tell you, I was really glad you're my mom, you know. She said, I always thought that you liked me more than your brother did, you know. And I said, yeah, probably true. So then we started to talk about things. And she says to me, you know, Lyle, remember when I told you there were 3 things that if you always remember, you'll be successful. She said, never marry a woman you wouldn't kiss right after she had your baby. And always remember that the problems that you're sharing or that you're causing other people, they have more trouble on their shoulders than they can handle now. And if you would just be so kind as to help lift off some of that problem, they would smile and it'll run over onto your face. And she said, I said, yeah, I told her those. I said, I remember that. She said, well, I have a new one now. I said, what's that? She said, I want you to always remember that now I'm going to die, and there's nobody out here to help you anymore. My lawyer died, everybody died. And she said, so it's going to be really dark for you. And she said, in the darkness, there's always stars, and the stars can always give you directions. She said, so one of two things is going to happen to you, Lyle. Either you're going to come out of prison a bitter old man, or you're going to come out of prison a better old man. She said, I know what you're capable of. I don't know what you're going to do. She said, but I've taught you all I can teach you. She said, I got to go. And she tried to hang the phone up, but she couldn't find the saddle. And I could hear her looking for it, and pretty soon it hit. And then all I heard was, and I tried to call the next morning, and they told me that she was dead. So she lived just long enough to tell me that. And that really had a profound effect on my life, you know, in terms of being a bitter old man or a better man.
I can really see the loop with getting to kids early and letting them know they have this potential in them, and that the way they're choosing to, well, the way they're reacting to their trauma is not on them, and there's a better way, and we can help them out of it.
That's right. We certainly can. Yep. We just need the chance. We need the environment. We need the environment to let that happen. We can't have you looking down our necks and expecting us to fail. We need you to say, we need to do this because these kids are coming into this system every day, and there's a factory manufacturing it.
Thanks very much for your time, Lyle. It's been a real pleasure. And for those listening at home, they can find out more about you at padgroup.org, which I believe is your main website. And there's a lot of information about you online. Lyle Wildes, the brain coach. There's a brain talk on TEDx. I believe there's a massive amount of change needs to happen in society and life. And it's really beautiful to be at this time where we can talk around the world, where we do have technology, where there is coming into a new paradigm of neuroscience. And people are starting to really look at the unsustainable cost of what we've been doing and go, look, there are better ways. You know, we can't hide from this anymore. It's just, there's always going to be vested interests, but I think through our own actions, we can shape a better world.
Yep, I believe that's true. And we will. And we're going to.
Thanks for joining me on another episode of Smarter Impact. My name's Philip Bateman, and I'm here to speak with the very best minds in business, technology, politics, and society. Is that you? Is it somebody you know? It might be you. Reach out and send me a message. Don't be shy. I'd really like to hear from you, and I'd really like your support. Help me do more of this. Help me grow the audience. Click like and share this video. It makes a huge difference because we're all basically fighting against an algorithm. So get behind me. Let's make this happen. It's a pleasure to be bringing you this material, and I look forward to seeing you the next time. Bye-bye.